I'm going to walk you through about some code, front-end code. So this is a front-end app. So let's after you open from the GitHub, then we just need to run the backend first. So the backend is run the mock server. So we have a backend server available. Then we run the front end. Yeah. So that's where we come to this screen. Right. So the first screen. Now I go through the code together. So you can see here. So the app.txt. That's our first file. So you can see we have a route. So the root route, that is user form, right? So that's the main one. So don't worry about this one. So we have another route here. So this is for the return user. So when I say return user, I mean if a user they fill the form halfway through, then they save and exit. So then they can get the email. They will come back, right? When they come back, I will prefill the existing data, so that will go through this route, right? So for now, we just look at the first one. So the use form, you can see we pass some property pass here. So use form is one of our main form here, right? So you can see we pass so many property here. So what's these properties? Okay, so if we go here, if we just open the inspection, then go to network, you can see we made API call here, right? So this API call actually return certificate expectations, return some data here. So this data is used to fill these questions here, right? Because each of these questions are configurable. So this is to pre-fill this data. So if another way you look at this, if you go to component, right, so component, you can see this user form props, right? So these are the props. So certificate, you can see certificate, we have AWS certificate, then we have Scrum Master certificate, we have AWS certificate big data. So that is used to fill like certificate here, right? So that's how this user form, why we pass this property. Okay, so now let's go to user form, because user form is the main form. User form is inside here. Okay, so you can see there are so many. Okay, one thing is for this user form component, we use the class component, right? For all other component, we use we are not using class component, but for this one, we're using class component. There's no particular reason, right? So we just try to use different technologies so then we can be familiar with all of this. So user form, so if we look at the main render, so we have a model. So this model is to use to pop up some message. For example, there's some warning message, some successful message. So that's the purpose for this model. Okay, so the main thing here, so we only have one function here, fetch component for next step. Right, so if we just go to here, have a look at what is fetch component for next step do. Right, so this is, you can see we basically switch step. Right, depends on the step, then we will if the form step is welcome, right, then we will render welcome component. So this welcome component. So each of this step is one of the component. If the form step is personal details, then we'll render personal details component. You see this personal details component. And that's how we this depends on the which steps are. So by default, this step is if you look at the step, is this state. So the step is form step dot welcome. So that's the default. So by default, we go to the welcome page. So each of these steps can be easily moved. Right. So next time, if we want to move the experience before scales, right? So we just change the order. So this order is defined in a file, constant file, right? Inside constant file is under constant file. So we have form steps. Right. So welcome is step 1, personal details is 2, scales 3. We can easily change this order. When we change this order, so that will also change the order on here. And when you go to next, right, if I put skills as 2 and personal details as 3, so then when I go to next, so I will go to skills rather than personal details. I can quickly show you that, right? So let's just quickly to prove this. So let's say this is 3 and this is 2. Control S. Data skills, right? We go to skills, right? For some reason, this one haven't changed, so I need to look at that. So, but this does change. The steps does change. If we go back, will become welcome, right? So that's how this works. Okay, so I just change this back 2 and 3. Okay, let's go back to user forms. Okay, so as I said, this is the main form, right? So when we go on welcome, we will pass next step. Right, let's open welcome component. The welcome component, that's the first component. Welcome is basically it doesn't have anything, it's just some information. Right, so what we interested is the button, the next button. Right, we're interested when we click next button, what happened. So you can see when click next button, this unclick event is handle next. Handle next is events here. Then we call props dot next step. Right. So this is a callback. Right. So we pass this function as props. So when click this, we say we'll call props next step. So props dot next step is here. Is this? We'll call this next step. Right. So this next step will call the function here in this component. Right. So this, yeah, you need to understand this, how this pass the function as props. Right. So when we go to this, click this next step, so we go to, then we call this here, this next step. Right. So because we are currently on welcome, right? So what does this do is this simply set the state, set step becomes step 2. Right. So when this step becomes step 2, right, because step is a state. So when we change this step, which is change the state, so the component will get re-rendered. Right. So when component get re-rendered, So we will re-render this fetch component for next step. Right, so we know the step is 2. Step is 2. Then we will go to this, say step 2 is personal details. So that will call personal details. Right? Then we will render the personal details component. So this will go to personal details. Right, so then I go to next. If I click next here, again in the personal details, if I click next, so see what will happen. So we go to personal details. Personal details is a component. Here we have next button, the same, right? Your handle next. Handle next is exactly the same as the welcome component. So we will call the props next step. So this props next step is next step. So we'll call this function this dot next. So we go to this dot next. So our current step is here. So then we'll run the code. We'll run all the code underneath here. Right, so all the code underneath here, then well, this is called web servers to save the call the API, make an API call to save the data. Then when it's successful, they'll go to next step. So what does this go to next step do? Is this go to next step is simply, if we don't pass the particular number, we just send the step plus 1, right? The currently step is 2, then step plus 1 becomes 3. Step plus 1 becomes 3, then again we go through the previous process. We will re-render this component again because the state gets changed. So when we re-render this component, the state is 3, the step is 3, then the 3 is skill. Then we will render this skill. So that's how the whole thing works. Hope that help you understand